and they knew they had to move on to a post-industrial era. And so these guys like Bertrand Russell and Wells, etc., prepared the minds of people through books. Russell with his non-fiction, Wells with his fiction primarily, and of course we had Bernard Shaw with his idea of fiction, promoting certain changing values through their books, hoping that the public would adopt them as they upgraded the system from what had served its purpose to get the public to serve a new purpose, you see. It was never for the public's benefit, it was to get the sheep from one field into the next field without causing too much panic. And like Albert Pike said, the Grand Master of Freemasonry, the High Pope of Masonry, he said, we never begin a premature revolution. We always prepare the groundwork before we even begin the launch of the revolution itself.
Say you want a revolution, well, you know, we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution, well, you know, we all want to change the world.
Now, the Webbs were interesting people because Sidney Webb was such a bureaucrat. He used to put the members of the Fabian Society to a hypnotic trance and a sleep, a deep coma almost, with his bureaucraties. He had a special language of his own, which he was cultivating for all bureaucrats. We're all familiar with some of it today because it's mentioned over television news stations quite frequently. They actually do talk like that amongst themselves, by the way. But the Webbs led off what appeared to be this great left-wing labor organization to get the herd, as they called the people, moving into the next stage, a scientific era, you see, a technological age. And that was their job, was to con them and to get them to come along willingly, thinking it was all on their behalf. So here's a statement from Bertrand Russell's autobiography about the Webbs themselves, just to let you know where these people really had their mind. He said on page 115 of the autobiography of Bertrand Russell, it says, both of them, the Webbs, were fundamentally undemocratic and regarded it as a function of a statesman to bamboozle or terrorize the populace. I realized the origins of Mrs. Webb's conceptions of government when she repeated to me her father's description of shareholders' meetings. It is the recognized function of directors to keep shareholders in their place. And she had a similar view about the relation of the government to the electorate. So that's the kind of people who led, and still do, by the way, the Labour Party. It's a con job over the working people because they've never had one of their own in the top, and it never will happen. Their leaders are always supplied to them. She goes on to talk about her father, Beatrice Webb. Her father's stories of his career had not given her any undue respect for the great. After he had built huts for the winter quarters of the French armies in the Crimea, he went to Paris to get paid. And from then, of course, he talks about him putting up the huts and so on, as I said before, in the destroyed areas across the planet. He was the Halliburton of his day. He had all the contracts from governments. And that's where the Potter family obtained the masses of their wealth. So these characters were anything but working class. Bertrand Russell also mentions that they hated Ramsay MacDonald, who was the front man for the Labour Party. They had nothing in common with him since they came from an upper class, and they were rather hostile to him since he was uncouth and unlearned, etc. In other words, the Webbs were incredibly snobbish, which is very common in Britain. away your education and your state. You're actually, not just your state of birth or level of birth. It's a caste system. It has so much in common with India, because Britain, England, has a caste system pretty well identical to that of India. And it may be one day we'll find out that the high Brahmins of India are the same bloodlines of those that run Britain, and I wouldn't be in the least surprised if that's the case. So Bertrand Russell, the Webbs, H.G. Wells, and Wells tried to take over the Fabian Society at one point, and the Webbs put him back in his place. Wells was a manic depressive himself, and he played with drugs, etc. He had the usual upper class problems with sexual relations. He had to have his wives. He had different wives, and they had to sign contracts that they would do certain things for him in a sexual manner, and promise to keep their mouths shut if they ever got divorced. So no doubt he had various fetishes, and perhaps when his wife was beating him with the whip, maybe he thought of the working classes getting beaten. Who knows? Something turned this strange man on. So we have these types of characters running the left and the right wing. Now, people who want to read the autobiography of Bertrand Russell should think for themselves as they read it. Remember, there's much more information about Bertrand Russell than his own autobiography. You'll find another book. This particular one is called In the Minds of Men. Excellent book. The subtitle is Darwin and the New World Order, and that was written by Ian Taylor, who's a scientist in Canada, and he goes through much more of these particular characters who changed society, changed history, created the fads that became taught as reality, like Darwinianism. He says, in fact, in his own book, this one here, In the Minds of Men, commenting on Bertrand Russell, he said Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead, of course, was put out there to push for abortion and so on. And actually, she was more than just an abortionist. She wanted to also start sterilization processes, much like Margaret Sanger had done before her, for the mentally unfit, as they called them. And of course, once they have an IQ level which they claim is appropriate, and everybody says that's fine, I'm above that. Well, of course, like every other law they have in the book, they then change it and expand it, and it would have been a horror show if this had come to pass. But Mead became the darling, it said, of humanists such as Bertrand Russell in 1929, and Havelock Ellis, who cited her work often to promote their own ideas of sexual liberation, because this free sex, is what they called it, free love, was started in the 1800s by these same aristocratic people that they wanted the people to emulate.